before you ask Him. Pray then in this way. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive them, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. May God's Spirit speak to us today through these words of Scripture, the music we sing here, and the message shared this day. God's word for God's people. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Francis. The prayer that changes us. When Robert Louis Stevenson was a boy, he once remarked to his mother, he said, "Mama, you can't be good without praying." Oh. How do you know, Robert, she asked. "Well, because I've tried," he answered. Which brings to mind a story about another little fellow, one who'd been sent to his room because he'd been rather bad. And a short time later, he came out and said to his mother, "I've been thinking about what I did, and I said a prayer." "Ooh, well, that's fine," she said. "If you ask God to make you good, He will help you." I didn't ask Him to make me good or help me be good. I asked Him to help you to put up with me. Prayer. I remember one of my favorite Peanuts cartoons years ago, where Peppermint Patty was in class, and she's sitting down, and the math test comes around, and she has this look of horror on her face, and she closes her eyes, and then she wilts into the chair and says, "As long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in schools." Prayer. We talk about it, we use the words, we even talk about giving thoughts and prayers to one another. But what is prayer? What is it at its core? Well, the first thing we can say about prayer is that it's universal. It's one of the most common of human spiritual practices. Prayer is found across the world in a variety of forms in all sorts of different traditions, religious traditions. Various traditions employ a variety of techniques and forms and methods of articulation of prayer. So in our tradition, the Christian tradition, our focus in prayer is communication with God. It's a way of focusing and expressing our intentions for something to happen or for some situation to be in the world. So traditions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the prayers are directed to God, who serves as the one who listens to and receives such stated intentions or prayers. But you can find prayer in Buddhism, in Hinduism, even in paganism and Wicca, and in indigenous and traditional societies all across the globe. It's really a universal human phenomenon practice. Excuse me. What's unique in Christian prayer is how this practice is grounded in the life and teaching of Jesus Christ. And it's often that we direct our prayers to him in a very personal, basically almost face-to-face manner, as if we are directly talking to Jesus. And the third thing we can say is that prayer expresses what's in our hearts. It expresses what's in our hearts. So at its heart, prayer is the formal or deliberate stating of an intention for oneself or for another person or situation in the world, group of persons, even for the sort of the state of affairs of the world. So here's what it is. We desire that a certain thing happen, or a certain change occur in the world. We state that. It's our intention. It's our desire. And we formulate that intention into words. That's the essence of prayer. I always tell people, if you can think, you can pray. You don't even have to be able to talk. If you can form your intentions into some expression, there you are, able to pray. So, but it arises out of what is basically in our hearts. And so there's that connection between the heart's desire in the world, the mind's way of phrasing that, and then perhaps you'll actually then vocalize it conversationally. That is prayer. John Bunyan said this. He said, "When thou prayest, rather let thy heart be without words than thy words without heart." Makes sense, right? You see, it comes from the heart, finds expression, but if it doesn't even find expression, maybe just sighing is the appropriate thing. In fact, Paul says that. The Spirit intercedes for us sometimes in sighs too deep for words. And that's the heart reaching out to God, reaching out to the world, maybe breaking on behalf of the world. But there it begins. It begins with the content of the heart. So why pray? Well, the urge to pray, the impulse to connect with that which is greater than us and which encompasses all of us and encompasses all of the universe, it's somehow implanted within us. And I found this to be a characteristic of all the various religions that I've studied from around the world. For instance, the preacher in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 11, expresses it this way. He says, He has made everything God. God has made everything beautiful in its time. God has also set eternity in the human heart. So there is a presence, there is a desire, there is an opening in the human heart that actually desires that connection with the universe beyond it and with one another. We connect with the universe through one another, and that is set within our heart. So, with this in mind, how does the prayer of Jesus change us? Because this is, right, the prayer that changes us. That's the name of the series. Well, how does this particular prayer of Jesus change us? Well, first off, we need to understand that prayer operates and affects us by operating at the level of conscious thought. And I want to repeat that. Prayer affects us first. Do you hear that? We often think prayer is trying to affect something, somebody's outside of us, but it affects us first. Jesus said that our heavenly parent already knows far better what we want and really need than we know how to ask for it. So what the act of prayer does is to tune our hearts and minds into acknowledging and realizing that which God already knows. Okay? It's tuning in. Think of an old-fashioned radio. If you haven't actually used one, go watch a movie about World War II. That tuning in you would do with that dial. That's what prayer is doing. It's tuning our conscious thoughts, and in fact, even our deeper intentions into what God already knows. And repeated prayers actually affect what we think about, and consequently, what we set our hearts on. See, there's that interaction between our thoughts and our heart's intentions. And I said prayer starts from the heart, but sometimes the heart itself needs to be taught what is good, what is noble, what is true, what is perfect in the world, what we should set our thoughts around. So repeated prayers affect what we start to think about and consequently what we set our hearts on. So, like, for example, this is how advertisements work, right? I love these streaming services that you can get online that you pay already for, but all of a sudden commercials are finding their way back into our streaming programs. And they're usually the same little 15 seconds of something every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, depending on which streaming service you have, right? By the time the program is over, you could say that advertisement yourself, right? Prayer operates in the same fashion. We repeat this so that it starts to sink in deeper into our consciousness, deeper into our awareness. So you take the words, say like an advertisement, it becomes fixed in our thinking. Add to that certain emotional qualities that make us desire that product, and you produce a certain desired human behavior, which is buying stuff. Well, prayer is operating that same way, that common level of human consciousness. So what we focus our attention and desires upon forms the basis of our prayers. So the prayer of Jesus focuses our consciousness and our desires upon God. And it also focuses us upon the idea of bringing about God's will in the world, which is interesting. That seems to be sort of a no-brainer, right? Don't we want God's will to be done? Well, how do we know what that is? Unless we start to tune ourselves into God's intentions for the world. So, the prayer of Jesus helps us to focus our consciousness and our desires upon God and about bringing God's will into the world, which is, I think, basically the point of prayer in the first place. So here's my definition of prayer. that prayer is that part of the will of God that needs the vehicle of human expression in order to be manifested in the material world. In other words, if God has implanted eternity in our hearts, God is essentially creating the capacity for God's will. See? You see how that is? You're now going to go home dancing to that song, right? Thank you, Sherry. But we have implanted within us that capacity. And so prayer is that part of God's will that requires that we give expression in the way that humans give expression. In other words, we've been basically created to pray, and created then to be vehicles of bringing about God's will and way in the world. So that's what Jesus was trying to do with this very simple form of prayer. That definition of prayer roots it in the will of God, so that our very desire or need to pray is already a function of God's will. So to even sit down and say, I think I need to pray, bingo, you're already doing God's will. You are tuning into that source that is at the center of the universe. And you're going to sink deeper into that source of love and reality. God desires us to communicate and to train our consciousness upon the godly, heavenly, divine, spiritual, whatever you want to use for a word, those sorts of matters in order to that we would be formed as human beings by that which is eternal and divine. So that's what I mean by saying that the urge to pray is somehow implanted within us. So, the prayer of Jesus. It has three main parts, and it moves through essentially three phases. First, we focus on the will of God. You could say it's sort of an upward movement. The first part, focusing upon the will of God. And then we focus on our own lives, which is an inward vector. So we focus up, and then we focus within, what's going on within, what needs to be changed within me, what's blocking me. And then we focus on the world. It's an outward vector. So there's this movement, even in this very simple prayer of Jesus. So he begins the prayer by focusing our minds on the task of helping to bring about the will of God. But, how do we rightly discern the will of God? We've taken the first step by saying, okay, let me settle into this connection, this communication, this thing within me. Well, how do we know the mind of anyone? Grace, this is what you're going to be discovering with Ida. How do we get to know one another? By talking a lot, right? Constant communication. That's how we begin. To communicate with God, to actually open ourselves, and to really understand the mind of another one, you have to listen. So prayer has to be this two-way communication. And you have to renew that communication from time to time. This is true even if you have been in communication with someone for a long time. had this example this summer of going back to the United Methodist camp and helping out in the kitchen. And if you work together in some place like a kitchen, you actually have to develop a certain sort of shorthand and a way of communicating, and in fact communicating beyond communicating, by understanding what the other person, what the chef, who's in charge of the kitchen, what they want, what their usual routine is, and so on. And I didn't work in the kitchen last year because I was recovering from surgery. And this year, so I got back in the kitchen. The kitchen was very familiar. The people were familiar. But I had to renew my sense of what's the routine? What does David like, to be done here, and so on and so forth. And so there was that communication sort of picking up again. And then I was able to anticipate what it was that needed to be done, what needed to be set up, what pots and pans were we going to use, what, the whole thing. What's the time schedule? See, that was already then reinstilled within me. And so the idea of having a regular prayer practice helps you to instill that so that at some point you don't need to be asking, what should I be doing here? The more we practice a thing, the more adept we are at doing that thing, and the more attuned or intuitive we become with understanding the nuances of that thing. E. Stanley Jones explained it this way. He said, prayer is surrender, surrender to the will of God and cooperation with that will. If I throw out a boat hook from the boat and catch hold of the shore and pull, do I pull the shore to me, or do I pull myself to the shore? Prayer is not pulling God to my will, but the aligning of my will to the will of God. So that's the first section of this prayer. And then we focus on our lives. We have that inward movement. It focuses on what we're doing in our lives and with our lives. It focuses upon simplifying our attention only to what is needful each day for living and how we live our lives in community. It moves us to examine our interactions with other people. Why would you need to ask for forgiveness? Well, we probably need to ask for forgiveness of the people around us every day. Maybe for small things, but just recognizing that we can rub each other the wrong way. And so the prayer moves us to say, wow, what is going on in my life? That's the second. It moves us to examine our interactions with other people, our family, our friends, our foes, perfect strangers. How'd you interact with somebody in the line in the store the other day? Or the clerk? What are the rifts in our relationships and world? What do we need to do to mend those rifts? That's the level of that second inward movement. And then there's the focus on the world. Finally, it acknowledges the reality of evil in the world. The fact that our human societies are not expressions of God's love, mercy, and justice. And we then pray that our minds will not be shaped by that evil. So it acknowledges that evil and then asks that we not be shaped by it, but be shaped by God's reality instead, and God's way of living. Alfred Lord Tennyson said, "More things are wrought by prayer than the world dreams of." So there's a great arc in the prayer. To God, to ourselves, out into the world. God, ourselves, and the world. And this reflects actually the divine action that moves from God to human individuals and out into the world that's created by humans. We're just getting in that divine rhythm, that divine flow. So this is basically what we're going to be looking at in a little greater depth